Welcome to another deep dive. This time it's into the art of discipline and building those lasting habits, the ones that we all want, inspired by the wisdom of, well, Marcus Aurelius and Stoic philosophy in general.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you shared some really interesting sources with me, meditations, of course,
Yeah.
Seneca's letters from a Stoic,
Right.
and Epictetus's discourses. This is some pretty heavy stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It is a fascinating combination, though, isn't it? You've got a Roman emperor,
Right,
you've got a playwright turned political advisor,
yeah.
and then a former slave. And they all, in some ways, converge on these potent ideas about self-mastery.
It makes you wonder, what did they know that maybe we've forgotten? What made this virtue of discipline so central to their philosophies?
Yeah. Well, one thing that really jumps out, and this is from all three of them, is this idea that discipline is actually the path to true freedom.
Hmm. That seems a little counterintuitive, though. Like, isn't freedom being able to do whatever you want?
That's what we're often led to believe, right?
Yep.
But Epictetus, for instance, in the Discourses, he argues that most people are actually slaves to
Oh,
their desires and to external circumstances, right?
right.
They react emotionally. They're constantly sort of chasing fleeting pleasures or avoiding any kind of discomfort.
So they're not really in control.
They're never really in control.
It's like being on a roller coaster that you didn't want to ride, and you're just along for the ride.
That's a really good way to put it. And Seneca, in his letters, he echoes this idea as well. But he uses maybe a more provocative metaphor. He talks about being a slave to philosophy.
Hmm.
But by that, he means a slave to reason.
So instead of being ruled by our impulses, we choose to be governed by logic and thoughtful consideration.
Exactly. It's about letting your rational mind kind of guide your actions instead of just giving in to every whim, every fleeting desire.
I could see how that applies to building those lasting habits.
Yeah.
Because, if we're constantly reacting to every craving or urge to procrastinate, it's no wonder we can't stay consistent.
It's like trying to build a house on shifting sands.
Right.
So the Stoics are giving you that bedrock of reason on which to build those daily habits.
Okay, so if discipline equals freedom, and freedom is necessary for building those strong habits, where do we even begin? Like, how do we start cultivating that discipline?
Yeah.
And I noticed that, in these texts, they seem to emphasize small, consistent actions as those building blocks.
Yeah.
Why the focus on the tiny things?
Well, both Epictetus and Seneca believed that focusing on what was in our control, so our thoughts, our actions,
Right.
was key. And each small choice becomes an opportunity to practice that self-control and strengthen, well, what we think of as willpower.
It's interesting how that connects to the emperor theme that you mentioned. Instead of conquering vast territories, it's more like conquering those small impulses one at a time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, can you imagine Marcus Aurelius hitting the snooze button 5 times or endlessly scrolling through social media?
Probably not.
It's unlikely, right?
Yeah.
Because he understood that every small choice was a chance to practice that self-control.
So building that inner fortress brick by brick. And, speaking of building, I noticed that the Stoics didn't shy away from discomfort. They actually seemed to embrace it
Right.
as essential for growth. Why is that?
They believe that obstacles and challenges were opportunities to practice resilience and to practice virtue. Seneca, for instance, wrote a really interesting letter about dealing with a serious illness. And rather than kind of despairing, he saw it as this chance to strengthen his mind.
Oh, interesting. So he didn't just try to, endure it. He was actively trying to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. He was trying to see it as this training ground for his mental and emotional fortitude. And Marcus Aurelius, in the Meditations, frequently reminds himself to view challenges as opportunities to stay true to his principles.
So they understood that a mind that could weather the storms was truly free.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like a Stoic boot camp. You push yourself to the limit and you discover what you're really made of. But let's be honest. Sometimes just getting out of bed can feel like an epic battle of will. How would a Stoic approach those moments where you just don't feel like doing what you should be doing?
Well, instead of giving in to that feeling, right, or waiting for some burst of motivation, they would focus on, again, what they could control.
Okay.
They would ask, is this within my power to change? If not, then accept it and move on.
Okay.
If it is, then act in alignment with your values, even if it's difficult.
So instead of getting bogged down in, wishing things were different or feeling bad about it, you can direct your energy towards what you can actually influence.
That's right, because they believed that willpower was far more reliable than the whims of motivation.
So it's not about waiting for inspiration to strike. It's about choosing to act. even when you're not feeling it.
Exactly.
But how do we train our willpower to be that strong and consistent? I mean, most of us aren't Roman emperors with legions to command.
Right. Well, that's a great question, and that brings us to some of the very practical advice that the Stoics offered on building a daily routine that actually supports discipline.
That's what I want to hear. How do I start living like a Stoic, even if my chariot's stuck in traffic?
One of the things they emphasized was starting each day with intention. So instead of letting the day control you, you take a few moments to consciously choose how you want to approach the day.
That sounds a little bit like mindfulness, like something you'd hear in a yoga studio, not necessarily from an emperor.
It is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Seneca really stresses this in his letters. He suggests visualizing how you want to act, reminding yourself of your values, essentially setting the tone for the day.
So rather than just hitting snooze and then frantically scrolling through emails, you take that time to kind of mentally prepare yourself for the day ahead.
Exactly. You're priming your mind for success by consciously choosing how you want to respond to whatever comes your way.
Almost like a warrior putting on his armor before battle. Okay, so what about when things don't go according to plan? Because that's going to happen, right?
Right?
How do you stay stoic when the world throws you a curveball?
Well, that's where their emphasis on focusing on what's within your control becomes really, really helpful.
Okay,
Epictetus, in the Discourses, he uses this analogy of being a guest at a banquet.
a banquet. That doesn't sound very disciplining.
No, it's not about the menu, it's more about the mindset. He
Right.
says, when you go to a banquet, remember you are there as a guest. Do not try to control the menu or the conversation or the seating arrangement.
Don't be a demanding guest.
Exactly. Instead, focus on what you can control, your own actions and reactions. So enjoy the company, appreciate the food, and be grateful for the experience, even if it's not exactly what you pictured it.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Because you can apply that guest mindset to so many situations in life where you feel frustrated or powerless.
Exactly. And they understood that so much of our suffering comes from trying to control things that are ultimately outside our sphere of influence.
It's like trying to control the weather.
Yeah.
You just could be disappointed.
And so they remind us that true freedom comes from accepting what we can't change and focusing our energy on what we can.
So direct that energy toward mastering your own mind and making those wise choices. But let's get practical. What did the Stoics have to say about actually building those daily habits? Were there any specific techniques they recommended besides starting the day with intention?
Well, another key principle they emphasized was moderation. Moderation in all things.
That sounds almost too simple.
I know.
We hear that all the time, but what did moderation actually look like for them?
Well, it's not about deprivation or following a set of rigid rules. It's more about finding that sweet spot between indulgence and asceticism. Seneca, for instance, describes his own experience with fasting.
Did Seneca do juice cleanses too?
Not exactly, but he writes, I have fasted, but not to the point of exhaustion. I have indulged, but not to the point of excess. I have sought pleasure, but not to the point of losing myself in it.
So it's about being mindful of your choices, not going to extremes in either direction.
Exactly. And this applies to everything from how much we eat and drink to how much time we spend working or relaxing. It's about finding that balance that allows us to live fully without becoming slaves to our desires.
You know, that makes a lot of sense, especially today, when it seems like everything is about going big or going home or constantly pushing yourself to the limit.
And the Stoics remind us that sometimes going medium is actually the wisest and the most sustainable path. It's about choosing what truly nourishes us, not just chasing fleeting pleasures.
So this idea of moderation actually helps you build your discipline.
Absolutely. Because every time we choose to forego that extra slice of cake or resist that urge to endlessly scroll social media, we're strengthening our self-control. It's like doing reps at the mental gym.
So you're not just building a strong body, but a strong mind, capable of resisting those tempting distractions and making choices that actually align with your values.
Exactly. And as we practice moderation consistently, it actually becomes easier to resist those impulses, and we build confidence in our ability to choose wisely.
It's almost like a positive feedback loop. Like the more you practice discipline, the stronger your willpower becomes. And then that makes it easier to make those virtuous choices. But what about when we slip up? Because we all do, right? I mean, we're human. How did the Stoics deal with setbacks or even what we might consider failures?
Well, for starters, they didn't see setbacks and failures. They saw them as opportunities for learning and growth.
Okay, so instead of beating yourself up for, missing a workout or indulging in too much banquet food,
Right.
you view it as a chance to just adjust and get back on track.
Exactly. And they really emphasized the importance of focusing on the process, not just the outcome. Building true discipline, it's a journey, not a destination.
Hmm.
So it's about progress, not perfection.
That takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
It allows you to just focus on those small, consistent efforts that ultimately lead to lasting change.
Exactly. And they also remind us that we're not alone in this journey. They saw virtue as something that spreads outwards, like ripples in a pond.
Hmm.
And each of us, by cultivating our own discipline and self-mastery, contributes to a more virtuous world.
That's beautiful. But it's also, I have to admit, a little bit intimidating. Because what if I'm still struggling to get my own act together?
Hmm.
Does that mean I'm letting the universe down?
Not at all. Remember, the Stoics were incredibly realistic about human nature. Even Marcus Aurelius, as emperor, he had to constantly remind himself to stay the course.
Right.
And his meditations are full of these personal reflections and encouragements to himself to live in accordance with his values.
So even an emperor, with all the power and privilege in the world, still struggled with discipline.
Absolutely.
Hmm. It's good to know we're all in this together.
Exactly. And I think it highlights the key takeaway, which is discipline is a lifelong practice. It's not a destination. It's a journey of constant self-reflection, course correction, and recommitment to those highest values.
This deep dive has already given me so much to think about. I'm starting to see how these Stoic principles offer such a powerful framework for building those lasting habits, those mental fortresses that we talked about earlier.
Mm.
But before we completely conquer our inner worlds, let's take a quick pause to reflect on what we've learned so far, and we'll be right back to wrap up our exploration of the art of discipline.
And we are back. I gotta say, after exploring all those Stoic concepts, I'm feeling pretty motivated. Kind of ready to trade my snooze button for a Spartan spear.
I wouldn't recommend starting the day with a spear, but
Yeah,
but I understand the sentiment.
right.
Yeah, I think it's amazing how those ancient ideas can still feel so relevant and so motivating.
Absolutely. And we covered a lot of ground, from viewing discipline as the path to true freedom, to the power of those small, consistent actions, and even how to befriend discomfort as a training ground for growth.
Right, yeah. We've also talked about, starting each day with intention, that guest mindset.
Practicing moderation, all these things are incredibly powerful tools for building a life of purpose and resilience.
Yeah. But there's this one idea that keeps coming back to me. It's this Stoic concept of cosmopolitanism,
Mm,
that we're all interconnected. Our individual choices somehow contribute to a larger good.
right.
It's a beautiful idea, but I have to admit, it also feels a little intimidating.
I understand it's a big idea, but it's also incredibly empowering. The Stoics believe that we're all citizens of the world, bound by a common humanity.
So it's not just about individual self-improvement then.
Mm-hmm.
It's about recognizing how your actions impact the world around you.
Exactly. And Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, he talks about how what injures the hive injures the bee.
Right.
So he recognized that we're all part of a larger whole, and our actions, even the smallest ones, have consequences.
And Epictetus, even though he spent much of his life as a slave, still felt that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. He believed that true freedom came not just from mastering our own minds, but from understanding our place within that kind of grand scheme of things and acting in a way that contributed to the harmony of the whole.
So it's almost like we're all instruments in a giant orchestra.
Right.
When we play our part, well, with discipline and with skill, we contribute to a more beautiful and harmonious symphony.
I love that. And it adds another dimension into the Stoic understanding of discipline.
Hmm.
It's not just about personal gain, it's about recognizing our interconnectedness and acting in a way that benefits that whole orchestra.
Hmm. That's really inspiring. It makes those daily choices feel even more meaningful. But if I'm being honest, it also kind of raises the stakes a bit. What if I'm still struggling with those snooze buttons and late-night social media scrolls?
Right.
Does that mean I'm somehow letting down the universe?
Not at all. Remember, the Stoics were incredibly pragmatic
Okay.
and understanding of human nature. They knew that we're all works in progress. Even Marcus Aurelius, emperor, he had his moments of struggle.
So it's not about achieving some perfect state of Stoic enlightenment.
No,
Okay.
it's about the continuous effort, the daily recommitment to living in alignment with those values.
That's a release. I was starting to feel the weight of the entire cosmos on my shoulders.
I understand, but remember, even Marcus Aurelius, he had to remind himself to stay focused. And his meditations are full of those personal reflections and encouragements to himself. It's a constant practice, even for an emperor philosopher.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
And I think we've really explored how these ancient Stoic principles offer kind of a roadmap to a life of purpose and resilience and inner peace, not just for Roman emperors, but for all of us.
And the beauty of it is we get to choose how we navigate that roadmap.
Right.
We can take those small, consistent steps, each day build those inner fortresses, knowing that even our smallest efforts contribute to a greater good.
It's almost like we've unearthed a treasure chest filled with ancient wisdom, and now it's up to us to decide what gems we want to take out into the world.
I love that. And as you go forth on your own Stoic journey, remember the words of Marcus Aurelius. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one.
What a powerful call to action. This deep dive has truly given me so much to think about, to apply, and to keep coming back to. So until next time, fellow deep divers, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into that vast ocean of knowledge. 2045-8.